You drift back in time, not to a specific year etched into stone, but to an era where history and myth intertwined like the threads of an ancient tapestry. Your destination? The shadowy, tantalizing world of Homer, the supposed architect of the epic journey you're about to undertake. You try to picture him, perhaps a wizened old man with a flowing beard, or maybe a youthful, bright-eyed bard, fingers dancing on a lyre. But here's the rub, you see. The very existence of Homer is, and has always been, shrouded in a mist thicker than any Aegean fog. We talk about Homer as if he's a singular, undeniable historical figure, as tangible as your morning cup of ambrosia. But historians still argue whether he was a real person, a collective of poets, or even just a convenient label for a long-standing oral tradition. It's like trying to find the first raindrop in a storm. Nearly impossible, yet you know the rain exists. You might imagine Homer, if he existed, living sometime around the 8th century BCE. This wasn't a time of readily available paperbacks or streaming services, so you can forget about him signing copies of the Odyssey at a book launch. Instead, stories were breathed into existence, sung, and passed from memory to memory. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the introduction of the Greek alphabet, adapted from the Phoenician script, really took hold around this very period. Before then, writing was largely for administrative purposes, keeping track of grain or taxes. The idea of writing down a sprawling narrative like the Odyssey was in itself a revolutionary act, moving these vibrant oral traditions from the ephemeral breath of a bard to something more enduring, something that could be replicated and studied for millennia. Consider for a moment the sheer audacity of it, capturing the fluid, improvisational art of storytelling and pinning it down onto papyrus or clay tablets. It's a bit like trying to bottle the wind, or perhaps more accurately, trying to write down every single improvised joke a stand-up comedian has ever told. The humor, the timing, the audience interaction, much of it would be lost, wouldn't it? This brings us to a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the Homeric epics. Some scholars propose that the sheer consistency and literary genius within the Iliad and Odyssey suggest a single, brilliant mind at work. They point to linguistic patterns, recurring epithets, and thematic coherence as evidence. Yet others champion the idea that these epics are the culmination of generations of bards, each adding, refining, and polishing verses, a sort of ancient Wikipedia edited by countless anonymous contributors over centuries. Imagine if every lullaby you've ever heard, passed down through your family, suddenly coalesced into one grand, coherent symphony. That's the scale of the Homeric question. So, as you settle in, you're not just listening to a story, you're engaging with one of history's great literary puzzles. Is Homer a genius author, a shadowy editor, or a convenient placeholder for an entire epoch of storytelling? You won't find a definitive answer tonight, and neither have scholars in thousands of years. But the beauty of it is, the stories themselves, those epic adventures and heart-wrenching returns, endure regardless of who held the quill or the lyre. You can almost feel the whispers of those ancient bards in the air, shaping the words, weaving the magic, preparing you for the long, winding path ahead. You're entering a world where the very act of narration is a deep dive into the unknown, a journey not just through geographical lands, but through the mists of literary creation. The question of who wrote the Odyssey is as intriguing as any monster Odysseus ever faced, a riddle that continues to captivate and challenge us. As you continue your journey into the origins of the Odyssey, you shift your focus from the elusive Homer to the very bedrock upon which his stories were built, the oral tradition. Imagine, if you will, a world without books, without writing, without the instantaneous cascade of information that floods your modern life. In this ancient time, stories weren't read, they were heard, they were performed. Picture yourself gathered around a flickering fire, the only light cutting through the oppressive darkness, listening intently as a bard, perhaps a traveling minstrel, begins to sing. His voice, strong and resonant, weaves tales of heroes and gods, of distant lands and fearsome beasts. This wasn't just entertainment. It was how history was preserved, how cultural values were transmitted, and how communities found a shared identity. You can almost feel the collective breath held in the silence between verses, the anticipation building with every plucked string of the lyre. A mainstream historical fact about this period is that these bards, or auidoi, as they were called in ancient Greece, weren't simply reciters. They were often composers themselves, skilled in improvisation. They worked with a vast reservoir of poetic formulas, stock phrases, and recurring scenes that allowed them to construct narratives on the fly, adapting to their audience and the specific occasion. Think of it like a jazz musician improvising on a familiar melody. They have a framework, but within that, there's immense freedom and creativity. This isn't just about remembering a script. It's about inhabiting the story, becoming a conduit for the collective memory of a people. Historians still argue whether the Iliad and Odyssey were originally fully improvised oral performances that were later transcribed, or if there was always a fixed core that was then embellished upon by bards. It's a bit like trying to decide if the chicken or the egg came first. Only the chicken is a brilliant poet, and the egg is a timeless epic. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Have you ever considered the mnemonic devices these ancient bards must have employed to keep thousands of lines of poetry straight in their heads? It wasn't just rote memorization. Scholars suggest they might have used techniques similar to the memory palace method, associating specific parts of the narrative with physical locations in a mental landscape. Imagine Odysseus sailing past the sirens, and in the bard's mind, that scene is linked to a particular tree in his village, while the Cyclops' cave is tied to a specific rock formation he knows. It's like creating a mental Google Maps for an entire epic poem, complete with Street View. This extraordinary feat of memory highlights the sheer intellectual power required to maintain and transmit these vast narratives without any written aids. It wasn't just a party trick, it was a societal cornerstone, ensuring that stories of gods and heroes, of triumph and tragedy, lived on from one generation to the next. You can sense the ebb and flow of these narratives, passed down through countless voices, each one adding a subtle inflection, a new nuance, or perhaps even a slightly different ending before the story eventually began its journey onto the written page. The very rhythm and repetition you'll encounter in the Odyssey, the recurring epithets like resourceful Odysseus or rosy-fingered Dawn, aren't just poetic flourishes. They are echoes of this oral tradition, helpful cues for the bard to maintain meter and for the listener to follow the intricate plot. It's a bit like the chorus in a catchy pop song. It gives you something to hold on to, a familiar refrain in the midst of new verses. So, as you prepare to immerse yourself in Odysseus's adventures, remember that you're not just reading a book, you're engaging with the whispers of an ancient world, a world where the spoken word held immeasurable power, where stories were living, breathing entities shaped by countless voices before they ever found their way to the page. You are listening to the echoes of forgotten songs, carried on the winds of time. You've just wrapped your head around the idea of stories as living, breathing things, whispered from bard to bard. Now let's widen your view a bit and consider the tumultuous backdrop against which these epic tales, including the one you're about to dive into, were set: the Bronze Age collapse. This wasn't just a minor hiccup in history, it was a societal implosion so profound it makes our modern anxieties about recessions look like a picnic. Imagine an entire interconnected world, thriving for centuries, suddenly unraveling at the seams. It was a period, roughly between 1200 and 1150 BCE, when mighty civilizations across the Near East and Mediterranean simply vanished. Cities burned, trade routes withered, writing systems disappeared, and populations plummeted. You're talking about the collapse of empires, the sudden disappearance of advanced technologies, and a descent into what scholars often call a dark age. A mainstream historical fact about this period is the sheer scale of the destruction. Major powers like the Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, the New Kingdom of Egypt, though it struggled on, diminished, and the Ugaritic Kingdom in Syria all suffered catastrophic blows. We're talking about the systematic destruction of palatial centers, the heart of these complex societies. It's as if one day all the world's major capital cities simultaneously crumbled, and no one knew why. You can practically hear the echoes of panic in the sudden silence that descended upon these once bustling metropolises. Historians still argue whether the primary cause was widespread drought and famine, internal rebellions, massive migrations of sea peoples, a rather ominous and mysterious term for groups who ravaged coastal areas, or a complex combination of all these factors, creating a perfect storm of disaster. It's the kind of historical whodunit that keeps archaeologists up at night, sifting through layers of ash and broken pottery. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit related to this collapse, some theories suggest that the very complexity of the Bronze Age system made it uniquely vulnerable. Imagine an intricate global supply chain, far more interconnected than you might expect for the ancient world. A disruption in one part, say a copper mine in Cyprus or a grain harvest in Egypt, could have a domino effect across the entire network. It's like a massive ancient Jenga tower where removing one piece, even a seemingly small one, can bring the whole thing crashing down. This overspecialization and interdependence, while efficient in good times, became a fatal weakness when stresses mounted. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The very advancements that allowed these civilizations to flourish ultimately contributed to their fragility. You see, the world of the Odyssey, the world of brave warriors, grand palaces, and epic journeys, is implicitly set against the fading memory of this cataclysm. The very idea of a long, arduous journey home, battling monsters and hostile lands, resonates with the feeling of a world thrown into disarray. The heroes of the epics, like Odysseus, are navigating a landscape that is no longer as stable or predictable as it might have been in the heyday of the Mycenaean palaces. The gods are still powerful, but the human world feels more fractured, more dangerous. The stories themselves, transmitted through that oral tradition we discussed, became a way to make sense of this chaos, to project a sense of order and meaning onto a world that had seemingly lost both. They were narratives of resilience, of navigating the unknown, and of striving for a return to a lost home. Themes that would have deeply resonated with people living in the shadow of such profound collapse. Having explored the fiery end of the Bronze Age, you now rewind slightly to appreciate the grandeur that preceded the collapse, the world from which Odysseus himself would have sprung, the Mycenaean grandeur. Imagine imposing citadels built with colossal stones, so massive that later Greeks would attribute their construction to one-eyed giants. These weren't mere settlements. They were formidable fortresses, bristling with defensive walls, commanding the landscape. Think of them as the ancient world's VIP sections, designed to impress and intimidate, hinting at the wealth and power contained within. You're stepping into the era of Bronze Age kings, legendary heroes, and a society organized around powerful warrior elites. A mainstream historical fact about the Mycenaean civilization, which flourished from about 1600 to 1100 BCE, is their significant influence on later Greek culture, particularly through their elaborate burial practices and the rich goods found in their tombs. Think of the famous Mask of Agamemnon, a golden funeral mask found in a shaft grave at Mycenae, though historians still argue whether it truly belonged to the legendary king or an earlier ruler. Nevertheless, it speaks volumes about the incredible artistry and metallurgy of the time. These rulers weren't just building fancy houses, they were amassing immense riches, engaging in extensive trade across the Mediterranean, and commissioning breathtaking works of art. You can almost feel the weight of gold and bronze in your hands, shimmering under the ancient sun. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Mycenaean society was highly centralized and bureaucratic, far more so than you might imagine for such an early period. Their administration was meticulously recorded on Linear B tablets, a script that was eventually deciphered. These tablets, primarily economic records, reveal a world obsessed with inventory. How many sheep, how much olive oil, how many chariots, even how many pairs of sandals. It's like their royal palaces were giant, meticulously organized warehouses, complete with ancient spreadsheets. It shows a level of administrative sophistication that busts the myth of a purely primitive ancient world. Imagine bureaucrats in togas tallying sheep like it's the most thrilling thing in the world. It might not sound as glamorous as fighting a cyclops, but it was the underlying structure that supported their grand warrior society. The Mycenaean palaces, unlike the later Greek city-states, weren't public spaces. They were the private domains of the king and his court, heavily fortified and serving as centers for administration, craftsmanship, and storage. You wouldn't just waltz in for a casual visit. The heroes of the Odyssey, like Agamemnon, Menelaus, and indeed Odysseus himself, are all deeply rooted in this Mycenaean world. They are powerful kings, wealthy and respected, leading their own contingents of warriors. Their adventures, though set after the collapse, draw heavily on the memory of this prior grandeur. the grand halls Odysseus returns to, the wealth he's reclaiming, the very concept of a king ruling over a vast household. These are all echoes of the Mycenaean Golden Age. So, as you envision Odysseus sailing from Troy, remember the kind of world he left behind, a world of imposing citadels, intricate bureaucracy, and legendary wealth, a world whose echoes would continue to resonate through the Dark Ages and beyond, shaping the very fabric of his epic homecoming. You've imagined the mighty Mycenaean citadels, the seat of power for kings like Odysseus. Now your mind's eye must turn to the event that ignited the spark of his epic journey, the Trojan War. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was, in the mythical telling, a decade-long siege, a clash of heroes, and the crucible in which reputations were forged and fates decided. You envision the towering walls of Troy, a city whispered about in legends, a prize coveted by the Achaeans, the ancient Greeks, and fiercely defended by its own formidable warriors. This war is the grand, violent prologue to Odysseus's personal Odyssey, the necessary destruction that sets the stage for his long, winding path home. A mainstream historical fact about the Trojan War is that for centuries it was considered pure myth, a grand tale spun by bards for entertainment, much like a blockbuster movie. But then, in the late 19th century, Heinrich Schliemann, a rather colorful and controversial archaeologist, claimed to have discovered the ruins of Troy on the mound of Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. His excavations, though often criticized for their destructive methods, provided compelling evidence that a city did exist there, a city that had been destroyed multiple times, aligning with the idea of a long-standing conflict. This discovery transformed the Trojan War from a mere fable into a potential historical event, or at least a myth, rooted in some historical reality. You can almost hear the collective gasp of historians and classicists when the shovels hit those ancient bricks. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit, while Schliemann's discoveries were groundbreaking, the specific Troy he identified as Homer's city, Troy 7a if you're keeping score, shows signs of destruction by fire and warfare around 1180 BCE, which broadly aligns with the traditional dates for the Trojan War. However, it was a much smaller, less grand city than Homer's poetic description of well-built Troy would suggest. It was far from the sprawling metropolis you might imagine from the epic poems. Some scholars even posit that the Homeric Troy might be an amalgamation of several real historical sites, or that the poet simply exaggerated for dramatic effect. So, the city you're picturing in your mind's eye might be a literary embellishment, grander than the archaeological reality. It's like hearing a tall tale about a friend's vacation. The basic facts might be true, but the adventures are certainly spiced up for maximum impact. Historians still argue whether the Trojan War itself was a singular, massive conflict as depicted in the Iliad, or if it was a series of smaller raids and skirmishes over many years, eventually coalescing into the grand narrative we know. Was it a fight for Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, or was it about control of lucrative trade routes through the Hellespont? The truth, as often happens in history, is probably more complex and less romantic than the poetic version. But regardless of its precise historical accuracy, the story of the Trojan War became a cornerstone of Greek identity, a shared heroic past that informed their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. As you imagine Odysseus, the cunning strategist, emerging from the wooden belly of the infamous Trojan horse, a detail famously absent from the Iliad but central to the Odyssey's setup, remember that this decade of brutal conflict, this shared trauma, is the inescapable foundation of his journey. It's the origin point, the moment the clock started ticking on his 20-year absence. With the fires of Troy still smoldering behind you and the echoes of the wooden horse's clatter fading, you now find yourself standing at the precipice of Odysseus's personal tragedy, his initial ill-fated departure from Troy. Imagine the scene: victory achieved, comrades celebrating, and the wind, finally, seeming to favor a swift return home. After 10 years of bloody warfare, the desire for their wives, children, and familiar hearths must have been an almost unbearable ache in the hearts of the Achaean warriors. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief, the eager anticipation of a smooth sailing. Yet, as you know, smooth sailing was precisely what Odysseus would not experience. A mainstream historical fact often overshadowed by the grander narrative of the Trojan War is the concept of a heroic return, or nostos, being almost as perilous as the war itself in ancient Greek thought. For many heroes, their journey home was fraught with divine anger, vengeful relatives, or fatal errors. Think of Agamemnon, who returned only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover. The ancient Greeks understood that coming home from a long, brutal war was not a simple matter of docking the ship and unpacking your bags. It was a treacherous transition, fraught with spiritual and physical dangers. You might have survived the spears of Troy, but could you survive the wrath of the gods or the treachery of your own household? Historians still argue whether the Nostos cycle of myths reflects a historical reality of returning veterans struggling to reintegrate into their societies, or if it's primarily a literary device to explore themes of identity and home. It's a chicken or egg question, but with more emotional baggage. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit concerning Odysseus's immediate departure. The early part of his journey is often attributed to his own hubris, a classic Greek flaw. While many other heroes sailed directly home, Odysseus, despite his renowned cunning, seems to have made some questionable decisions right off the bat. One prominent example is the sacking of Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. Instead of a swift, clean departure, Odysseus and his men lingered, plundering the city and feasting. This delay allowed the Cicones to rally their forces and launch a devastating counterattack, resulting in significant losses for Odysseus's crew. It's like throwing a wild party after a marathon and getting too comfortable, only to realize you've missed your flight and now a mob is coming for you. This decision, seemingly minor at the time, sets a precedent for the prolonged struggles that will follow, suggesting that not all of Odysseus's troubles are purely external. Sometimes, even the most intelligent hero has an oopsie moment. You can sense the shift in the narrative here, from the grand, collective struggle of the Trojan War to the deeply personal, harrowing ordeal of one man's return. The immediate aftermath of Troy, which should have been a triumph, quickly devolves into a desperate fight for survival. This initial misstep at Ismarus serves as a powerful reminder that even the most cunning heroes are fallible, and that the gods, easily offended, are always watching. It's the first ripple in the pond that will soon become a storm, setting Odysseus and his dwindling crew on a path through uncharted waters, both literal and metaphorical. This short-sighted plundering, this moment of celebratory indulgence, is the true genesis of the 20 years of suffering that await him. You watch as his ships, laden with plunder and optimism, begin their eastward turn, unaware that the journey they are embarking on will be far longer and far more terrible than any battle they faced at Troy. From the costly detour at Ismarus, you now see Odysseus and his men, battered but still clinging to hope, blown far off course by relentless winds and the wrath of displeased gods. Their journey takes a truly unexpected turn, leading them to a place that offers both solace and ultimately prolonged captivity, Calypso's Isle. Imagine a lush, verdant paradise, untouched by human hands, brimming with natural beauty. Here, on the mythical island of Ogygia, resides the nymph Calypso, a goddess of stunning beauty and immense power, who finds Odysseus washed ashore, utterly broken and alone after his ship is utterly destroyed. You can almost smell the fragrant cedars and hear the gentle lapping of waves on the pristine shore, a deceptive calm that hides a deeper sorrow. A mainstream historical fact here relates to the concept of divine intervention and the role of powerful female deities in ancient Greek mythology. Unlike the mortal women Odysseus encounters, Calypso is a goddess, immortal and immensely powerful. Her desire for Odysseus is absolute, and she holds him captive not out of malice, but out of a deep, possessive love. This reflects a common theme in Greek myths, where mortal heroes, no matter how great, are often at the mercy of divine whims and passions. You see this repeatedly: Zeus's many affairs, Hera's furious jealousy, Poseidon's endless vengeance against Odysseus. The gods aren't just distant observers. They are active, often capricious, participants in the human drama, pulling strings and orchestrating events with little regard for mortal suffering. Historians still argue whether these divine interventions represent a reflection of ancient Greek beliefs about fate versus free will, or if they are simply narrative devices to explain the unexplainable. It's like trying to decide if the gods are truly in charge or if they're just very effective scapegoats. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Calypso's offer to Odysseus, she doesn't just offer him comfort and sustenance, she offers him immortality. Imagine that for a moment, an escape from death itself, an eternity spent in paradise with a beautiful goddess. For a man who has just endured a decade of brutal war and now faces an uncertain, dangerous journey home, this is the ultimate temptation. Most mortals would leap at such an offer. Yet Odysseus, despite his tears and longing, famously refuses. He yearns for his mortal life, for his wife Penelope, and for his rocky island home of Ithaca. This steadfast refusal is incredibly significant. It highlights his defining characteristic, his unwavering nostos, his deep yearning for home, even over the allure of godhood. It's almost like turning down a golden ticket to an eternal, all-inclusive resort because you really miss your slightly leaky old houseboat. You can sense the profound sadness and longing that permeates Odysseus's 7 years on Ogygia. While outwardly he lives in comfort, enjoying feasts and the nymph's company, inwardly he is consumed by melancholy, staring out at the endless sea, his heart aching for Ithaca. Calypso, despite her power, cannot win his true affection, and ultimately she is compelled by the will of Zeus, persuaded by Athena, of course, to release him. This forced liberation emphasizes that even the most powerful goddesses cannot thwart the greater divine plan, or the relentless pull of a hero's destiny. So, as you picture Odysseus building a crude raft, leaving behind the idyllic but suffocating embrace of Calypso, you understand that this isn't just an escape. It's a profound declaration of his very identity, his absolute commitment to his mortal life and his beloved home, no matter the cost. From the costly detour at Ismarus, you now see Odysseus and his men, battered but still clinging to hope, blown far off course by relentless winds and the wrath of displeased gods. Their journey takes a truly unexpected turn, leading them to a place that offers both solace and ultimately prolonged captivity, Calypso's Isle. Imagine a lush, verdant paradise, untouched by human hands, brimming with natural beauty. Here, on the mythical island of Ogygia, resides the nymph Calypso, a goddess of stunning beauty and immense power, who finds Odysseus washed ashore, utterly broken and alone after his ship is utterly destroyed. You can almost smell the fragrant cedars and hear the gentle lapping of waves on the pristine shore, a deceptive calm that hides a deeper sorrow. A mainstream historical fact here relates to the concept of divine intervention and the role of powerful female deities in ancient Greek mythology. Unlike the mortal women Odysseus encounters, Calypso is a goddess, immortal and immensely powerful. Her desire for Odysseus is absolute, and she holds him captive not out of malice, but out of a deep, possessive love. This reflects a common theme in Greek myths, where mortal heroes, no matter how great, are often at the mercy of divine whims and passions. You see this repeatedly: Zeus's many affairs, Hera's furious jealousy, Poseidon's endless vengeance against Odysseus. The gods aren't just distant observers. They are active, often capricious, participants in the human drama, pulling strings and orchestrating events with little regard for mortal suffering. Historians still argue whether these divine interventions represent a reflection of ancient Greek beliefs about fate versus free will, or if they are simply narrative devices to explain the unexplainable. It's like trying to decide if the gods are truly in charge or if they're just very effective scapegoats. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Calypso's offer to Odysseus, she doesn't just offer him comfort and sustenance, she offers him immortality. Imagine that for a moment, an escape from death itself, an eternity spent in paradise with a beautiful goddess. For a man who has just endured a decade of brutal war and now faces an uncertain, dangerous journey home, this is the ultimate temptation. Most mortals would leap at such an offer. Yet Odysseus, despite his tears and longing, famously refuses. He yearns for his mortal life, for his wife Penelope, and for his rocky island home of Ithaca. This steadfast refusal is incredibly significant. It highlights his defining characteristic, his unwavering nostos, his deep yearning for home, even over the allure of godhood. It's almost like turning down a golden ticket to an eternal, all-inclusive resort because you really miss your slightly leaky old houseboat. You can sense the profound sadness and longing that permeates Odysseus's 7 years on Ogygia. While outwardly he lives in comfort, enjoying feasts and the nymph's company, inwardly he is consumed by melancholy, staring out at the endless sea, his heart aching for Ithaca. Calypso, despite her power, cannot win his true affection, and ultimately she is compelled by the will of Zeus, persuaded by Athena, of course, to release him. This forced liberation emphasizes that even the most powerful goddesses cannot thwart the greater divine plan, or the relentless pull of a hero's destiny. So, as you picture Odysseus building a crude raft, leaving behind the idyllic but suffocating embrace of Calypso, you understand that this isn't just an escape. It's a profound declaration of his very identity, his absolute commitment to his mortal life and his beloved home, no matter the cost. Resting in the opulent halls of the Phaeacians, you now lean in closer as Odysseus, our weary but compelling narrator, begins to recount his most famous and terrifying encounter, the confrontation with the Cyclops' fury. Imagine a colossal, one-eyed giant, brutish and lawless, living in a cave and utterly disdainful of the gods and the sacred laws of Xenia that the Phaeacians so diligently uphold. This isn't just a monster. He's a living, breathing antithesis to everything civilized and humane. You can almost feel the tremor in Odysseus's voice as he describes the sheer, horrifying scale of the beast and the primal fear that must have gripped his men. A mainstream historical fact concerning the Cyclops legend is its potential connection to prehistoric discoveries. Some scholars propose that the myth of the one-eyed giant might have originated from the discovery of ancient elephant skulls by early Greeks. Imagine stumbling upon a massive skull with a single large cavity in the center, where the trunk once connected. To an unscientific mind, unfamiliar with such creatures, this could easily be interpreted as the eye socket of a gigantic, one-eyed humanoid. This isn't a universally accepted theory, mind you, but it's a fascinating example of how ancient peoples might have interpreted natural phenomena through a mythological lens. Historians still argue whether such paleontological finds directly influence the Cyclops myth, or if the idea of a giant was a more general cultural archetype. It's like finding a strange rock and wondering if it's just a rock, or if it was once part of a dragon's tooth. Now for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit from this specific episode: Odysseus's cunning use of the name nobody, or autis in Greek, when introducing himself to the Cyclops Polyphemus. When Polyphemus is blinded and cries out for help, shouting that nobody is hurting me, swing, his fellow Cyclopes assume he's simply ill or suffering from divine affliction and offer no aid. This brilliant linguistic trick is a testament to Odysseus's quick wit and ability to think several steps ahead, even in the direst of circumstances. It's the ultimate ancient "who's on first" routine, but with life or death stakes. This verbal dexterity, a key characteristic of Odysseus, is often as potent as any physical strength or weapon, highlighting that brains often trump brawn in his adventures. You feel the tension mount as Odysseus recounts how he and his men are trapped in the cave, watching in horror as Polyphemus devours his companions. The hero's initial impulse is to kill the giant, but he quickly realizes that they would then be trapped by the massive boulder blocking the cave entrance, which only the Cyclops can move. This moment of strategic restraint, his ability to delay gratification for a greater, more complex plan, is what truly sets Odysseus apart. He doesn't just react, he calculates, he plans, he innovates. His solution, to blind the Cyclops with a sharpened stake and then escape by clinging to the bellies of the giant's sheep, is a masterpiece of tactical brilliance, turning their vulnerability into their salvation. You can almost feel the coarse wool of the sheep against your face as you imagine clinging on for dear life. This episode is a microcosm of the Odyssey itself, a struggle against overwhelming odds, overcome not by brute force, but by a combination of daring, cleverness, and a touch of sheer, audacious nerve. Having narrowly escaped the Cyclops' cave through a brilliant display of cunning, you now follow Odysseus and his men as they sail onward, only to encounter another formidable yet far more seductive peril: Circe's enchantments. Imagine a powerful sorceress dwelling in a grand, secluded palace on the island of Aea, surrounded by seemingly tame yet unsettlingly human-like wild animals. This isn't a brute monster. This is a mistress of illusion and transformation, whose charm is as dangerous as any physical threat. You can almost feel the strange, otherworldly atmosphere of her island, a place of beauty and subtle dread. A mainstream historical fact related to Circe is her association with pharmacology and herbalism in ancient Greek thought. While she is a goddess with magical powers, her transformations often involve potent herbs and potions. This reflects a broader ancient world understanding of the power of plants, both for healing and for harm. Many ancient cultures had extensive knowledge of botanical properties, and skilled practitioners, whether shamans, healers, or indeed mythical sorceresses, were highly respected or feared. You can almost see her, meticulously grinding herbs in a mortar, concocting her potent brews. Historians still argue whether figures like Circe represent a distant memory of powerful female shamans or priestesses who held significant influence through their knowledge of natural remedies, or if she is purely a literary creation designed to explore themes of temptation and human weakness. It's like wondering if an ancient apothecary was really just a chemist, or if they had a secret stash of magic beans. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit about Circe's magic, the specific animal she transforms Odysseus's men into are pigs. Not ferocious lions or majestic eagles, but humble, grunting swine. This choice isn't arbitrary, it carries a symbolic weight. Pigs in many cultures are associated with gluttony, slovenliness, and base instincts. By transforming his men into pigs, Circe isn't just physically changing them. She's stripping away their humanity, reducing them to their most animalistic desires. It's a powerful metaphor for the dangers of unchecked indulgence and loss of self-control. Imagine your battle-hardened comrades suddenly snuffling around in a pigsty, completely unaware of their former glory. It's almost darkly humorous, if it weren't so terrifying. You feel the tension rise as Odysseus, forewarned by the god Hermes and given a magical herb, moly, to protect him, ventures alone to confront Circe. Unlike his men, he resists her potion and forces her to restore his crew to human form. Yet, the story doesn't end there. Odysseus and his men remain on Aea for a full year, captivated by Circe's hospitality and feasts, seemingly forgetting their burning desire for home. This prolonged stay highlights another facet of Odysseus's journey: the constant pull of distraction and comfort away from his ultimate goal. Even the resourceful Odysseus can be swayed by a pleasant detour, and it takes the prodding of his loyal crew to remind him of their nostos. So, As you see them finally setting sail from Circe's beautiful but dangerous island, you understand that this encounter wasn't just a test of physical bravery against magic, but a deeper test of resolve against the insidious allure of ease and forgetfulness. Their journey home is still a long way off, and even powerful magic can't erase the memory of what they've lost. Having finally broken free from Circe's alluring grip, you follow Odysseus and his men as they embark on perhaps the most chilling leg of their journey, the descent to Hades. Imagine sailing to the very edge of the known world, to the sunless land where the Cimmerians dwell, shrouded in perpetual mist and darkness. This isn't a place of physical combat with monsters. It's a journey into the spiritual realm, a confrontation with death itself. You can almost feel the air growing cold and heavy, the eerie silence broken only by the mournful murmurs of the departed. A mainstream historical fact crucial to understanding this episode is the ancient Greek belief in the underworld as a real, albeit shadowy realm where the souls of the dead resided. It wasn't necessarily a place of eternal torment like some later concepts of hell, but rather a gloomy, joyless existence. The Greeks often performed sacrifices and rituals to communicate with the dead, believing that their spirits could offer prophecy or advice. Odysseus's journey to Hades, known as a Nekia, is a prime example of this belief in practice, showcasing a ritualistic summoning of spirits rather than a direct entrance into a fiery abyss. Historians still argue whether the Greek underworld concept was influenced by earlier Near Eastern myths of the dead, or if it developed independently as a way to process grief and the mystery of what lies beyond life. It's like trying to trace the very first shadow ever cast. You know it's there, but its origin is elusive. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Odysseus's methods for summoning the dead, he doesn't just knock on a door, he performs a very specific ritual, digging a trench, pouring libations of milk, honey, wine, water, and barley, and then sacrificing black sheep, letting their blood fill the trench. The blood is the key, as it provides the ephemeral shades of the dead with enough vitality to speak. This gruesome yet necessary act highlights the practical, almost transactional nature of ancient Greek religious practices when dealing with the chthonic, underworld, deities, and spirits. Imagine having to butcher livestock just to get a phone call through to the other side. It's a far cry from a séance with flickering candles. You feel a shiver as Odysseus recounts the parade of spectral figures that appear. His mother, Anticlea, whose death he hadn't known of, and then various heroes from the Trojan War, like Agamemnon, Achilles, and Ajax. Each encounter is poignant, offering glimpses into their tragic fates and contrasting their earthly glories with their shadowy afterlife. But the true purpose of this terrifying descent is to consult the prophet Tiresias, who is blind in life, but retains his prophetic abilities in death. Tiresias provides Odysseus with crucial warnings and prophecies about the remainder of his journey home, including the dangers of the sirens and the sacred cattle of Helios, and the challenges awaiting him in Ithaca. You listen intently, realizing that this journey into the land of the dead isn't just a detour, it's a vital turning point, providing the hero with the foresight and guidance he desperately needs to navigate the perils that still lie ahead. It's a reminder that sometimes, to find your way forward, you must first confront the ghosts of the past. Armed with Tiresias's prophecies from the underworld, you now sail with Odysseus and his crew into one of the most famously alluring dangers, the Siren's Song. Imagine three, or sometimes two, beautiful yet monstrous creatures perched on rocky shores, their voices weaving a melody so impossibly sweet, so utterly captivating, that no sailor can resist. This isn't a fight of strength against strength. It's a battle of will against irresistible temptation, a psychological assault designed to lure men to their doom on the jagged rocks below. You can almost hear the haunting, ethereal strains carried on the wind, promising knowledge, happiness, and an end to all suffering. A mainstream historical fact concerning the sirens is their depiction in ancient Greek art and literature, which evolved over time. Early representations often showed them as bird women, perhaps with human heads and avian bodies, embodying a more predatory and monstrous aspect. Later, they became more human-like, emphasizing their seductive beauty and making their allure even more insidious. This shift reflects a broader artistic and cultural trend of personifying abstract dangers, making them more relatable and therefore, in a way, more terrifying. Historians still argue whether the sirens myth emerged from sailors' experiences with treacherous coastlines and deceptive winds, or if they were symbolic representations of dangerous female power and the perils of excessive pleasure. It's like trying to figure out if that catchy, annoying song on the radio is based on a real-life obsession or just a really good marketing jingle. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Odysseus's strategy to overcome the sirens, he doesn't just avoid them. He insists on hearing their song, a remarkable act of intellectual curiosity and self-mastery. To achieve this, he orders his men to plug their ears with beeswax and then to tie him firmly to the mast of his ship, instructing them not to untie him, no matter how much he begs or pleads. This shows an incredible understanding of human weakness and a profound foresight to pre-commit to a course of action even against his future, overwhelmed self. It's a genius move, almost like setting up parental controls on your own brain. Imagine the sheer agony of hearing the most beautiful music ever conceived, pulling at your soul, and being utterly unable to respond, helpless but fully aware. You feel the tension in the scene as the ship approaches the Sirens' Island. The men row frantically, their ears sealed, while Odysseus writhes against his bonds, his face contorted in a silent scream, desperate to break free and follow the mesmerizing voices, promising to reveal all that comes to pass on the fertile earth. But his loyal crew, following his strict orders, only tighten the ropes, saving him from the inevitable shipwreck and watery grave that awaited all who succumbed. This episode is a powerful testament to Odysseus's unique combination of daring and wisdom. He doesn't just want to survive, he wants to experience the danger, to gain knowledge from it, and to overcome it through sheer force of will and strategic planning. The Siren's Song represents not just a physical threat, but a profound psychological one, the lure of escaping reality. And for a man burdened by so much, turning away from such an escape required a strength almost as great as battling a god. Freed from the mind-bending allure of the sirens, you now face a truly terrifying choice alongside Odysseus and his beleaguered crew, navigating the narrow strait guarded by Scylla and Charybdis. Imagine two monstrous perils, positioned so close together that escaping one means inevitably confronting the other. On one side, Scylla, a multi-headed monster with 12 feet and 6 long serpentine necks, each ending in a hideous head with triple rows of fangs. On the other, Charybdis, a monstrous whirlpool that gulps down and spews forth the sea's waters 3 times a day, threatening to swallow entire ships whole. This isn't a battle of cunning or strength, but a harrowing calculation of unavoidable loss. You can almost feel the spray from the churning vortex and the chill wind carrying the stench of Scylla's breath. A mainstream historical fact that gives context to this mythical strait is the very real dangers of ancient maritime navigation. Even without sea monsters, ancient sailors faced immense perils: sudden storms, rocky coastlines, strong currents, and unreliable winds. Key choke points in the Mediterranean, like the Strait of Messina between Sicily and mainland Italy, often associated with Scylla and Charybdis, were historically notorious for their strong currents and treacherous conditions. The myths often amplified these natural hazards into monstrous personifications, a way for ancient mariners to explain and cope with the terrifying uncertainties of their voyages. Historians still argue whether the specific descriptions of Scylla and Charybdis were inspired by actual whirlpools or difficult rock formations, or if they were purely imaginative constructs reflecting the human fear of overwhelming, inescapable forces. It's like wondering if a ghost story was born from a creaking house or a truly spectral presence. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit about Odysseus's agonizing decision, he chooses to sail closer to Scylla. Why? Because Tiresias had warned him that Charybdis would certainly swallow his entire ship, while Scylla would only claim a portion of his men. Odysseus, with his pragmatic, often brutal leadership style, makes the cold calculation to sacrifice 6 men to save the rest of the crew and the ship. It's a horrific choice, but a logical one in the face of 2 terrible options. Imagine being the one making that call, knowing you're condemning some of your loyal comrades to a gruesome death, but knowing it's the only way any of you will survive. It's the ultimate lesser of 2 evils scenario, painted in the darkest shades of ancient Greek epic. You watch, helpless, as Odysseus recounts the horror. 6 of his strongest men are snatched from the deck by Scylla's rapacious heads, screaming as they are dragged, struggling, to their gruesome deaths. Odysseus emphasizes that this was the most piteous sight he witnessed in all his wanderings. Despite his cunning and his ability to outsmart nearly every foe against Scylla and Charybdis, he is largely powerless, reduced to simply steering the ship through the terrifying gauntlet. This episode underscores the limits of human ingenuity when faced with overwhelming, indiscriminate natural or supernatural forces. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated terror and unavoidable sacrifice, a stark reminder that even the most resourceful hero cannot always escape the jaws of fate, or in this case, the literal jaws of a monster. Having endured the unspeakable horror of Scylla and Charybdis, you now sail with Odysseus and his rapidly dwindling crew to the island of Thrinacia, the sacred pasture land of the sun god, Helios's cattle. Imagine a lush island, dotted with magnificent, untouched herds of cattle and sheep, shimmering in the golden light, radiating a divine aura. This isn't a place of monsters or sorceresses, but a sacred sanctuary, a test of obedience and self-control. You can almost feel the serene, tempting peace of the island, a peace that belies the profound danger lurking beneath its surface. A mainstream historical fact concerning this episode is the deep reverence for sacred animals in many ancient cultures, and the severe consequences for desecrating them. In Greek mythology, specific animals were often consecrated to particular gods, making them inviolable. To harm such an animal was not merely a breach of manners, but a direct affront to the deity, inviting swift and terrible retribution. Think of the sacred owls of Athena or the doves of Aphrodite. Helios's cattle specifically were immortal and never reproduced or died naturally, symbolizing their divine nature. Historians still argue whether such prohibitions against harming sacred animals reflect an early form of animal welfare concerns, or if they were primarily religious taboos designed to reinforce divine power and societal order. It's like wondering if a "Do Not Touch" sign in a museum is about preserving the art, or just about making sure you don't break anything expensive. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the plight of Odysseus's men during this episode, they are literally starving while surrounded by prime, tempting livestock. Odysseus, remembering Tiresias's dire warning, tries desperately to keep his men from touching the cattle, even making them swear oaths. But adverse winds trap them on the island for a month, and their provisions run out. In their desperate hunger, while Odysseus is away praying, or napping depending on your interpretation, they succumb to temptation and slaughter some of the cattle for a feast. This highlights a fundamental human flaw, the inability to resist immediate gratification, especially when driven by extreme hardship. It's a bit like being told not to eat the last cookie in the jar when you haven't eaten in days, and then suddenly the cookie is gone. You feel the terrible inevitability of their fate as Odysseus returns to find the telltale smell of roasting meat. The gods, particularly Zeus, quickly respond to Helios's indignant pleas for vengeance. The sun god threatens to withdraw his light from the world, a truly terrifying prospect that prompts Zeus to promise retribution. And so, as they finally set sail from Thrinacia, seemingly free, Zeus unleashes a devastating storm. The ship is struck by a thunderbolt, and all of Odysseus's remaining men perish, drowned or devoured by the sea monsters. Odysseus alone survives, clinging to a piece of wreckage, cast adrift once more. This episode is the ultimate lesson in divine punishment for human transgression, a stark reminder that even the most cunning plans and valiant efforts can be undone by a single, fatal act of disobedience. It is the final, tragic loss that strips Odysseus of his entire crew, forcing him to face the remaining journey completely alone. Cast adrift and utterly alone after the tragic demise of his entire crew, you now watch Odysseus, battered and broken, as he finally washes ashore on the familiar coastline of Ithaca, his homeland. Imagine the emotional whiplash. After 20 years of war and wandering, of terrifying monsters and divine wrath, he's finally home. But this isn't the triumphant return of a conquering hero. Instead, he arrives in disguise, a ragged beggar, recognized by no one but his loyal dog and an old nurse. You can almost feel the mix of relief and profound apprehension as his feet touch the soil of his long-lost island, a place that is simultaneously deeply familiar and frighteningly changed. A mainstream historical fact essential to understanding Odysseus's situation is the pervasive threat of usurpation and challenges to royal authority in ancient monarchies. Kingships, especially after long absences or periods of instability, were vulnerable. Without a clear heir or a strong ruler, ambitious men would often try to seize power, particularly by trying to marry the queen and claim the throne. This wasn't just a plot device, it was a real and constant danger. The suitors are not just rude guests, they are a direct and existential threat to Odysseus's kingship, his family, and the stability of Ithaca. Historians still argue whether the concept of a long-lost king returning to reclaim his throne reflects common social anxieties of the time, or if it's a timeless narrative archetype that resonates across cultures. It's like wondering if stories of dragons guarding treasure reflect real hoarding behaviors, or just a universal love for shiny things. Now for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Odysseus's immediate decision to remain disguised. It is absolutely crucial to his survival and his ultimate plan. He doesn't immediately reveal himself, even to his son Telemachus or his wife Penelope, because he needs to assess the situation, understand the loyalties of his household, and formulate a strategy to deal with the overwhelming number of suitors. His disguise as a humble beggar allows him to move freely, gather intelligence, and observe the brazen behavior of the suitors firsthand without revealing his identity. It's the ultimate undercover operation, a masterclass in espionage before the term even existed. Imagine coming home after 2 decades and having to pretend to be a homeless person to figure out who's raiding your fridge and hitting on your spouse. Talk about an awkward reunion. You feel the weight of Odysseus's immense patience and self-control. After all he has endured, to be within sight of his goal, yet to hold back, to absorb insults and indignities from those who have invaded his home, speaks volumes about his cunning and strategic mind. He knows that a direct, head-on confrontation would be suicide. Instead, he embarks on a meticulous, dangerous game of observation, gathering information and waiting for the opportune moment. His first true recognition, poignant and heartbreaking, comes from his aging dog, Argos, who wags his tail and then dies. This moment, simple yet profound, reminds you that even through the years of disguise and suffering, the bonds of true loyalty endure. You watch as Odysseus, the master of disguise, begins to weave his final, most elaborate trap, turning himself into the bait to ensnare the arrogant intruders who have defiled his home. You're now firmly planted on Ithaca, observing Odysseus in his masterful disguise, blending seamlessly among the servants, and most importantly, among the arrogant men who have taken over his home. This brings you face to face with the central antagonists of the latter half of the Odyssey, the suitors' feast. Imagine not just a few unwelcome guests, but 100+ strong, boisterous, entitled mob, day in and day out, feasting on Odysseus's wealth, harassing his loyal servants, and openly disrespecting his family. You can almost hear the raucous laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the constant grating presence of men who believe themselves above the law. A mainstream historical fact crucial to understanding the suitors' outrageous behavior is the concept of divine justice in ancient Greek society. While there was no formal police force or modern legal system to stop them, their actions were seen as a grave offense against the gods, especially Zeus, the protector of Xenia, guest friendship. Remember that from Section 8? Their blatant disregard for hospitality, their consumption of another man's wealth, and their disrespect for Penelope's authority were accumulating a massive debt of divine wrath. It wasn't just about good manners, it was about cosmic balance. Historians still argue whether the extreme portrayal of the suitors reflects a real societal fear of lawless strongmen in periods of weak central authority, or if their exaggerated villainy serves as a literary device to justify Odysseus's eventual brutal retribution. It's like wondering if a villain in a movie is truly evil, or just really good at getting under your skin. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the suitors' sheer audacity. They weren't just eating Odysseus's food and drinking his wine, they were literally bankrupting his household. The sheer volume of consumption, day after day for years, would have crippled even a wealthy estate. They were not merely being disrespectful. They were committing an act of economic warfare, slowly but surely dismantling Odysseus's power base. Imagine a horde of frat brothers setting up permanent residence in your house, eating all your food, running up your credit card, and ignoring all your polite requests for them to leave. Multiply that by 100. Add ancient Greek notions of honor and property, and you start to get the picture. You feel the slow burn of Odysseus's rage as he witnesses this daily spectacle from within his own halls. He endures their insults, even physical abuse, as they mock the ragged beggar. But his internal fury is a cold, calculated fire. Each insult, each stolen morsel, each disrespectful jest fuels his resolve and strengthens his plan. He observes their routines, identifies their ringleaders, and meticulously prepares for the inevitable confrontation. His patience is not a sign of weakness, but of ultimate strength, a strategic weapon in itself. This period of quiet observation and endurance is as critical as any battle he fought at Troy or against the monsters. It's the gathering of intelligence, the sharpening of his resolve, and the final, agonizing build-up before the storm. You sense the tension growing, the calm before a very, very messy storm, as Odysseus, the master of disguise, continues to gather the final pieces of his vengeful puzzle, all while the suitors blissfully feast away their last days. You're now firmly planted on Ithaca, observing Odysseus in his masterful disguise, blending seamlessly among the servants, and most importantly, among the arrogant men who have taken over his home. This brings you face to face with the central antagonists of the latter half of the Odyssey, the suitors' feast. Imagine not just a few unwelcome guests, but 100+ strong, boisterous, entitled mob, day in and day out, feasting on Odysseus's wealth, harassing his loyal servants, and openly disrespecting his family. You can almost hear the raucous laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the constant grating presence of men who believe themselves above the law. A mainstream historical fact crucial to understanding the suitors' outrageous behavior is the concept of divine justice in ancient Greek society. While there was no formal police force or modern legal system to stop them, their actions were seen as a grave offense against the gods, especially Zeus, the protector of Xenia, guest friendship. Remember that from Section 8? Their blatant disregard for hospitality, their consumption of another man's wealth, and their disrespect for Penelope's authority were accumulating a massive debt of divine wrath. It wasn't just about good manners, it was about cosmic balance. Historians still argue whether the extreme portrayal of the suitors reflects a real societal fear of lawless strongmen in periods of weak central authority, or if their exaggerated villainy serves as a literary device to justify Odysseus's eventual brutal retribution. It's like wondering if a villain in a movie is truly evil or just really good at getting under your skin. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the suitors' sheer audacity, they weren't just eating Odysseus's food and drinking his wine, they were literally bankrupting his household. The sheer volume of consumption, day after day for years, would have crippled even a wealthy estate. They were not merely being disrespectful. They were committing an act of economic warfare, slowly but surely dismantling Odysseus's power base. Imagine a horde of frat brothers setting up permanent residence in your house, eating all your food, running up your credit C, while Odysseus silently seethes amidst the suitor's endless gluttony. Your attention now turns to the woman at the heart of this domestic siege, Penelope's web. Imagine a queen, besieged in her own home, constantly pressured by over 100 aggressive men to choose a new husband. Yet, despite her vulnerable position, Penelope exhibits a remarkable blend of loyalty, shrewdness, and resilience, employing cunning strategies to delay the inevitable. You can almost feel the weight of her grief and the incredible mental fortitude it took to maintain her resistance for so long. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek women, particularly those of high status, is that their social power, while often limited to the domestic sphere, could be significant within that realm. Penelope, as queen and mistress of the household, wields considerable influence, even in Odysseus's long absence. Her intelligence and resourcefulness are depicted as virtues comparable to Odysseus's own. Unlike many other female figures in epic poetry, who are often passive or victims, Penelope is an active agent, skillfully navigating a truly impossible situation. Historians still argue whether Penelope's character reflects a societal ideal for women in ancient Greece, or if her extraordinary intelligence is an exception to the rule, a literary elevation of a specific, exceptional queen. It's like wondering if a strong female character in a modern film is meant to inspire, or if she's just an outlier in a patriarchal narrative. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about Penelope's famous delaying tactic. She promises the suitors that she will choose one of them once she finishes weaving a burial shroud for her elderly father-in-law, Laertes. However, each night, secretly and painstakingly, she unravels the weaving she completed during the day. This ingenious trick, which she maintains for 3 full years, demonstrates her incredible dedication and her subtle defiance. It's the ultimate long con, a quiet act of rebellion carried out under the very noses of her oppressors. Imagine the sheer mental and physical exhaustion of such a task, meticulously weaving by day, only to undo your work by the moonlight. It's a masterclass in procrastination, but with a purpose far nobler than avoiding homework. You sense the deep emotional bond between Penelope and Odysseus, a loyalty that transcends the years of separation and the constant pressure. Her unwavering faithfulness is not passive, it is an active choice, reinforced by her cunning and her quiet strength. She maintains a facade of sorrow and indecision, playing the suitors against each other, buying precious time while hoping against hope for her husband's return. Her web is not just a piece of cloth. It is a metaphor for the intricate traps she sets for her unwanted guests, weaving a narrative of delay that keeps her free and her home relatively intact. As you watch her, weary but determined, you realize that Penelope is every bit as much a hero of this epic as Odysseus, battling her own monsters, the suitors, with the weapons of wit, patience, and unyielding devotion. Ard the door, and ignoring all your polite requests for them to leave. Multiply that by 100, add ancient Greek notions of honor and property, and you start to get the picture. You feel the slow burn of Odysseus's rage as he witnesses this daily spectacle from within his own halls. He endures their insults, even physical abuse, as they mock the ragged beggar. But his internal fury is a cold, calculated fire. Each insult, each stolen morsel, each disrespectful jest fuels his resolve and strengthens his plan. He observes their routines, identifies their ringleaders, and meticulously prepares for the inevitable confrontation. His patience is not a sign of weakness, but of ultimate strength, a strategic weapon in itself. This period of quiet observation and endurance is as critical as any battle he fought at Troy or against the monsters. It's the gathering of intelligence, the sharpening of his resolve, and the final, agonizing build-up before the storm. You sense the tension growing, the calm before a very, very messy storm, as Odysseus, the master of disguise, continues to gather the final pieces of his vengeful puzzle, all while the suitors blissfully feast away their last days. The tension in Odysseus's palace, thick with the insolence of the suitors and Penelope's endless delays, has reached its breaking point. Now, the stage is set for the definitive challenge, the moment where all the accumulated deceit and patience will finally culminate, the great bow contest. Imagine Penelope, weary of the suitor's relentless pressure, announcing a seemingly impossible feat. She will marry the man who can string Odysseus's mighty bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through the holes of 12 axe heads lined up in a row. You can almost feel the collective scoff from the arrogant suitors, confident that such a task is beyond any mortal man, certainly beyond a ragged beggar. A mainstream historical fact concerning this event is the significance of the bow as a symbol of authority and prowess in ancient warfare and heroic narratives. A hero's unique weapon often represented his identity and unmatched skill. Only Heracles could wield his mighty club. Only Achilles could wear his divine armor, and only Odysseus could string his powerful, recurve bow. This wasn't just a piece of sporting equipment. It was an extension of the man himself, a testament to his strength, skill, and rightful claim to power. Historians still argue whether such legendary weapons were inspired by particularly impressive historical artifacts, or if they were purely symbolic constructs to highlight the unique attributes of a hero. It's like wondering if King Arthur's Excalibur was a real sword, or just a really good excuse for him to be king. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the bow itself. It's described as incredibly stiff and difficult to string, so much so that none of the powerful suitors, despite their bravado, can even bend it. They try, grunting and straining, often warming it over a fire to try and make it more pliable, all to no avail. This physical inability, a seemingly simple task, becomes a powerful symbol of their unworthiness. They might be strong, but they lack the specific, almost mystical strength and skill that only Odysseus possesses. It's a bit like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with a hammer. You have the brute force, but not the specific finesse required. This serves to further highlight their hubris and sets them up for their inevitable fall. You feel the palpable shift in the hall as the disguised Odysseus, after enduring more insults and mockery, casually asks for a turn with the bow. The suitors laugh, scoffing at the beggar's audacity. Even Telemachus, knowing his father's true identity, struggles to keep a straight face. But then, with seemingly effortless grace, Odysseus takes the bow, inspects it, strings it with a single, resonant thwang, and without even rising from his seat, draws back the arrow and shoots it cleanly through all 12 axe heads. The silence that follows is deafening, a sudden realization dawning on the suitors that something is terribly, terribly wrong. This moment is not just a triumph of skill. It's the shattering of their illusions, the dramatic reveal of the true king. It's the ultimate mic drop, signaling that the games are over and the real reckoning has begun. The resonant thwang of Odysseus's bowstring still echoes in the hall, the arrow having pierced through the axe heads with impossible precision. The suitors, their laughter abruptly silenced, are left stunned, their arrogance momentarily replaced by a chilling dread. You are now standing on the threshold of the most violent and cathartic climax of the epic, vengeance unleashed. This isn't just a battle, it's a brutal reckoning, a bloody cleansing of a home defiled and a kingship usurped. You can almost feel the air crackling with sudden, deadly intent as the disguise is finally cast aside. A mainstream historical fact crucial to understanding the intensity of this violence is the concept of blood feud and retributive justice in ancient societies. In a world without formalized police forces or court systems as we know them, justice for grievous wrongs, especially against one's family or property, often involved direct, often brutal, retribution by the wronged party. Odysseus isn't just killing the suitors, he's executing a divinely sanctioned act of justice, reclaiming his honor and his domain. Their deaths are not portrayed as tragic, but as deserved punishment for their hubris and transgression. Historians still argue whether the extreme violence depicted here reflects a historical reality of personal vengeance in the absence of central authority, or if it serves a literary purpose to provide a satisfying, if brutal, resolution to the hero's suffering. It's like wondering if a dramatic courtroom scene is based on legal precedent or just good television. Now for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit about the sheer, overwhelming odds Odysseus faces. He initially stands alone, or nearly alone, against over 100 armed and desperate men. His allies are few: his son Telemachus, the swineherd Eumaeus, and the cowherd Philoetius. That's 4 men against a mob. This is a monumental asymmetry that underscores Odysseus's strategic brilliance and the element of surprise. The suitors are caught off guard, unarmed initially, and panicked. It's a bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except you've secretly set up booby traps, and the other guys don't even have their guns. You witness the horrifying efficiency of the slaughter. Odysseus, guided by Athena, begins firing arrows, picking off the ringleaders first, plunging the hall into chaos. Telemachus, having hidden the suitors' weapons beforehand, a clever move orchestrated with his father, now joins the fray, arming himself and his loyal allies. The desperate suitors try to fight back, hurling furniture and whatever they can find, but they are no match for Odysseus's skill, his divine aid, and his sheer, righteous fury. The halls that once echoed with their disrespectful feasting now resound with screams and the clash of bronze. This is not a glorious, formalized battle like those at Troy. It's a bloody, messy, and intensely personal purge. The very furniture, the pillars, the walls of his home are splattered with the blood of those who dared to desecrate it. Every blow struck is a payment for years of suffering, an act of reclaiming what was rightfully his. With the halls of Ithaca cleansed of the suitors' arrogant presence, their bodies cleared by the surviving loyal servants, you now stand with Odysseus as he begins the long, arduous process of restoring order and peace to his kingdom. This isn't just about winning a battle, it's about healing a fractured family and a broken society. You can almost feel the quiet exhaustion settling over the palace, the heavy weight of what has transpired, giving way to the cautious hope of rebuilding. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked after such climactic battles is the importance of reconciliation and re-establishing legitimate rule in ancient societies. A king's return wasn't complete until he had secured the loyalty of his people and pacified any lingering dissent. Odysseus, despite his brutal vengeance, must now navigate the political landscape of Ithaca, facing the anger of the suitors' families and the uncertainty of his own citizenry. This requires not just strength, but diplomacy and a demonstration of divine favor. Historians still argue whether the peaceful resolution of the conflict with the suitors' families, mediated by Athena, reflects a historical precedent for post-conflict reconciliation, or if it is a purely idealistic ending to ensure a complete, satisfying narrative. It's like wondering if a difficult family argument really ends with a hug, or if someone just decides to call it a night. Now, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit from this final phase of Odysseus's journey, Tiresias's prophecy from the underworld had one last, peculiar instruction for Odysseus. He was told that after restoring order in Ithaca, he must undertake one more journey, carrying an oar inland until he reached a people who knew nothing of the sea, who would mistake his oar for a winnowing fan, a tool for sifting grain. There, he was to plant the oar and offer sacrifices to Poseidon, finally appeasing the vengeful sea god. This isn't about escaping a monster, it's about fulfilling a bizarre, final penance. Imagine carrying a giant boat paddle hundreds of miles into the middle of nowhere, just to say sorry to a grumpy deity. It's almost comically specific, yet utterly serious in its religious implications. You sense the lingering whispers of future journeys, even as Odysseus begins to re-establish his life with Penelope and Telemachus. The final imagery is one of restoration, the family reunited, the household purged, and the proper order of things re-established under the watchful eye of Athena. Yet, the memory of his suffering, the losses, and the demands of fate still resonate. The Odyssey closes not just on a note of triumphant homecoming, but with the subtle acknowledgement that the hero's journey is rarely truly over. Peace is found, but at immense cost, and the world remains a vast, mysterious place, holding both danger and unforeseen destinations. You witness Odysseus, the survivor, the strategist, the king, finally finding a measure of rest, but with the quiet understanding that the echoes of his 20-year absence will forever shape him, and that the sea, even when calm, still holds secrets.